what are we doing here today, Pastor Alex?
It's Sermon Refresh.
It is a sermon refresh. So we're doing the Good Shepherd Refresh. We're trying out new concepts. This concept here, we just watched the sermon.
Yes.
Obviously, I didn't preach it.
I didn't preach it.
So it was Pastor Heidi, and she talked about God's love, and she also talked about God coming to us in the flesh in the form of a little baby boy.
Moving into the neighborhood.
I
liked that one.
So,
I liked it. So what was your, where did you find in that sermon sort of like a connection point that you went, oh, I know what that's like?
Well, I think I was telling you this. So she had a Martin Luther quote. And when she had said something along the lines of Martin Luther had said something trying to understand what God is, it's like he said a crushing weight or something like that comes down on you. And this, I think I've had that experience not just in terms of trying to understand God and what God is,
sure,
but I think also just when thinking about the universe, right? And so this idea that the universe is so big and massive. Because I came to faith a little later, and I'd say one of the hang-ups for me was this idea of where did God come from, the universe, all these things.
Right, okay.
And so when I tried to think of all these things, I was thinking about the universe is just as crushing of a weight as trying to understand what God is.
That video that they make where it's here is your country you live in.
Right.
Here is the planet. Here is the moon, solar system, and it keeps going back until basically all these little dots that are stars are not even stars.
Yeah, they're galaxies.
They're whole galaxies. I'm ooh, I'm gonna barf. It's too much. It's too big, and right. I get that sense as well of what crushing means when we're talking about the character of God or
right.
the power of God or God's permanence, that right. It's hard to fathom.
Right.
Yeah,
it is. And so I think when Pastor Heidi sort of said, God came in the form of this little baby, it's oh, well, that makes sense.
I've seen one of them.
I've seen 3 of them. Well, yeah. I've seen many babies. But
sure.
I have 3. So for me, that kind of was oh, it's a way that God is sort of making this connection with us in a way that we would understand.
Yeah, I think that's why Incarnation is for me, that is such a formative piece of why I believe what I believe is without the Incarnation, without Christ as an example, a living, walking, breathing example, we're looking at all these books on theology. I literally just talked about Josephus on there.
Yeah. That
Flavius Josephus, who's literally a Jewish person living in Rome, even acknowledges this person, this Jesus, this Nazarene guy, really created quite a little wave for some time, because this wasn't somebody who believed in the story, but just could document historically, there's quite a hubbub about this individual that's still making an impression
thousands of years later,
and on me,
right.
Personally, where I'm just his teachings, his ways, his words, his works all challenge me, confront some of my prejudices, confront the way I do things, confront the way I see things, and challenges me to a different obedience. And without Incarnation, if we're just talking about the one who formed the cosmos from a whisper,
right,
I have a really hard time coming at that because I'm saying, well, who am I?
Exactly.
What am I?
Right.
I'm not saying I'm that close to Jesus, but I get it. He was born to a family. He was born and grew up in a community. Right. That's not nothing. That's huge that we have a God who was with us, suffered, struggled likely.
Right.
You try to think, we don't have tons of stories of him in his youth, but he had adversity, beyond what we know of in the story. He's going to grow up and learn lessons and, hit himself with a hammer, all the same mistakes we all make. Mm-hmm. He suffered those things.
So was there any point, I brought up the whole idea of the crushing weight. Was there anything for you that spoke to you differently in her sermon? Anything you heard?
I would say similarly, I think the God with us, Incarnation, since that's kind of what the story is about in general, but moving into the neighborhood was helpful for me. Right. Because in saying then that I have a connection to Jesus and acknowledging, oh, look, Jesus has, like me, walked this planet, has, like me, experienced hunger.
Mm-hmm.
Probably experienced more than I did. But that means my neighbors as well.
Right.
That I'm not some unique creature.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I'm like my neighbor. I'm like a stranger. I'm like my enemies. I'm like my friends and family. My neighbors as well is the idea of God coming into the neighborhood was, I think, a helpful expression for me, because it's again reminding me of the Christ found in other people, of the image of God seen in all of creation, particularly in my brothers and sisters and my neighbors, and how paramount that was. It is very practical instruction to us. Mm-hmm. It's very challenging teachings, still circled heavily around these like greatest teachings of you got to love your neighbor. You got to look out for them. It's your responsibility to care for them.
Well, and I would say too, in what you're saying, this idea that when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, number one, he hasn't moved out, right?
No.
Jesus is still with us. But two, that's how close he is. That it's accessible for everyone. And so there's Jesus is never too far away that we can't have that connection and relationship. And I think it's just reminding yourself that yes, that that it may feel like, these things happened forever ago, but the truth is they're still happening now. Like the relationships with Jesus are still happening now, and the way that Jesus is being transformative is still happening now in our neighborhoods.
Well, and literally, when people talk about, they want like an experience, they want to know Jesus, they want to understand. I always say, there is an opportunity right now if you're interested.
Absolutely.
It's going to happen exactly where he said you'd find him.
Right.
Which is, when did we care for you, Lord?
Right.
When you visited me in prison.
Right.
When you fed me when I was hungry. When you cared for me when I was sick. Right. If you want to encounter Jesus, you can. You really can. It is in your neighbor, and it is in servant. It's in being a servant. It's in being a person who goes to the margins, to those who are perhaps perceived or feeling, experiencing an outsideness, and saying, there is an in here. There's an in here. And that we have the opportunity to then be Jesus in the room in all those scenarios, because Jesus is in the neighborhood. It's not some far off thing. You don't need to travel. I'm a big advocate for going and traveling and seeing other things, but have
those adventures.
Yes, but your neighbors are a great opportunity to serve the kingdom.
Exactly. All right. Cool. Anything else that you want to add to this little Good Shepherd Refresh recap of a sermon that we're doing today?
No, just, hey, you want to meet Jesus or you want to go see Jesus, lots of opportunities for you to serve and care for your neighbor. Do that. Do that. That's a great way to do it. Love your neighbor.
And so thank you so much for joining us for the Good Shepherd Refresh. Again, we're still trying to figure out sort of the voice of what this is, but it's hopefully your midweek spiritual maybe practices, a time for you to reconnect with the message of the week, to time to refocus. Maybe your work and the kids and relationships and all those things have kind of got in the way of those epiphanies you had during Sunday. And this is a way for you maybe to reconnect with those or hear a different message that others might have heard from that same sermon. So thank you so much for listening or watching. If you could, always, we are a big fan of giving us likes, subscribes, shares, comments, whatever it is. Let us know how you're connecting with the message, and we'll put a link to the sermon video in the comments so that you can watch this if you want to. And thank you so much, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Go team.
Take care.